Welcome to one more edition of Politics and Random. Egberto Willis, your host. We're here with Elizabeth Rusch. She's an award-winning author of more than 20 books, which have received multiple starred reviews from Publisher Weekly, Kirkus, Horn Book, Booklist School, Library Journal, and BCB, among others. Her work has won the Golden Kite Award, the Subaru Prize, the Cook Prize, the Green Earth Award, and the Oregon Book Award. I'm getting tired saying this. And has landed on many notable best lists. She's written for one of my favorite rags. She's also an author of more than 100 articles and publications, such as the New York Times, Smithsonian, Harper, Backpacker, Merck & Craft, What We Love Here, Mother Jones, and Portland Monthly, among many others. She has a bachelor's in economics from Duke University, a master's in public policy from the University of California, Berkeley, and has served as a Jacob K. Jevis Fellow in the U.S. Senate. She visits schools across the country and speaks widely on the topics of writing, teen activism, science heroes, and much more. And now she has a new book. You call this democracy? Welcome aboard, Elizabeth. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Absolutely. I mean, when I saw the title of your book, I said, you know, this is the time. And it's amazing that you're on today, given what has occurred over the last 2 days. So before we even get started about why you wrote the book and all that good stuff, what are your thoughts on the president's latest utterance?
Well, his utterings really concern me, especially his utterings about democracy and about handing over power, and especially about vote by mail. He's really undermining the faith of citizens in our elections. I am from Portland, Oregon, which has had vote by mail since 2000. It's very well researched. There have been, infinitesimal amounts of voter fraud with vote by mail. One message I really want to get across is it is safe to vote by mail. It is safer than going to the polls and standing in line with people who may or may not have COVID. It's a proven practice that's been used in this country for a long time. I'm actually really glad that 83% of Americans now have access to vote by mail. It's the most respectful way that, that our government can set up elections so that people can vote without worrying about, getting sick and dying, or even, who's going to take care of their kids or their elder care, or do they need to take time off work? So, yeah, I'm really worried about how he's undermining our citizens' faith in the system. And I really want to send a message to citizens that, vote by mail is 100% safe. It is, virtually fraud-free. There's all kinds of protections. And, this election is really important. And one thing also that I want to say is that it may take longer for ballots to be counted, the vote by mail ballots to be counted, and that's okay. That doesn't mean our system's not working. We should be patient and make sure that all votes are counted so that our elections can truly pick the next president.
I was very concerned about that initially because, as it turns out, what happened is I couldn't imagine why the president was so concerned about vote by mail. And so I said, I wonder if there's something with machines being rigged, and he's scared that vote by mail since it has traceability, that it's a problem. So I called up Greg Palast. I don't know if you know who Greg Palast is from, he is the voting expert here in the country. So I called up and I said, is there something and he said, no, the president just knows that if vote by mail is effective, he's definitely going to lose. And that's why he wants to do that.
I don't even know if that's true. I actually think that that President Trump, it may be a little bit misled about vote by mail. There are a lot of older people who tend to vote Republican, who would like to be able to vote by mail and feel confident and feel safe about it. It is not at all a done deal that voting by mail is going to turn the election over to a Democrat. The reason we have elections is so that people can express their will. And in every election, we don't know what that will is. And by golly, I want to know what every voter thinks. And I think vote by mail can help us do that and really make sure that the election reflects the will of the people. So in a way, he's it's sort of a lack of confidence on his part, that in a way that he's afraid to find out if we really get as many people voting as possible who they want.
Well,
And
well,
I
the
would
truth of the
recommend that he try to be more confident and let us vote and let us pick the next president.
Well, the polls are, people kind of are concerned with the polls. I have never been concerned with the polls because even during the Hillary Clinton episode, the polls came within the margins of error. Most of them did. So, I mean, it's not like the polls were wrong. It's just that the enthusiasm and the poll directionality and all of that is what made the difference in that election. But let's talk about what we really want to talk about, and that is your new book. You call this Democracy. Why did you decide to write this book? Although I think it's apropos.
Yeah, well, I'm frustrated with our government and with our elections, and people are frustrated with our government and elections. And I think that there is a real reason behind that frustration. And I really wanted to create a book that would take a hard look at our election processes and figure out what's working and in what ways are we actually undermining the principle of democracy, which is one person, one vote, and having the elections reflect the will of the people. So I look at aspects like the Electoral College, like automatic voter registration, like gerrymandering, and I try to illuminate how those strange structures affect our democracy and what people can do about them.
Now you created, along with this book, and this is something that you don't see often, a very well integrated website. And this website has a report card, a 50-state democracy report card. Please tell us about that. First of all, tell us how people get there. Tell us what's the purpose of it, and tell us what you expect to teach us out of that, and what you expect from us out of that.
Yeah, so when I was writing You Call This Democracy, I broke down everything into chapters, and each issue was covered in a chapter. So I had Electoral College and gerrymandering and voter suppression and vote by mail. And it's interesting, when I was writing, and I have a master's in public policy, when I was writing it, I was thinking, I wonder how things work in my state, in Oregon. I'm a pretty well-informed person, but I didn't know how Oregon fared on all of these issues. And so I thought, people, so many of these issues, the ways that elections are run, happens at the state level. And I thought that people would want to find out how their state fares. And so I collected data on all of the issues that I talk about in my book, and I broke them down by state, and I created a report card so that anyone in the country, so you're in Texas, is that right?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, so you can click on Texas and you can see, okay, so has Texas passed the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact? Well, no, Texas has not. Does Texas have gerrymandering? Or is there an independent citizen committee that draws the voting maps? Well, in Texas, you do have gerrymandering.
We have big gerrymandering, yes.
Big gerrymandering. In Texas, do you have automatic voter registration? You don't have automatic voter registration. So these are all very specific things that are happening in your state that are standing in the way of elections really representing the will of the people. So what I'm hoping that citizens will do is I hope they'll read You Call This Democracy and really understand why these structures and elements of our democracy are so important, and how if we don't get it right, our elections do not reflect the will of the people. And I hope that they will go to the website, which is called youcallthis.com, and click on the 50-state democracy report card and click on their state and read through, what issues, what things do I need to do in my state to have democracy work better in my state. And there are more resources on the website that include kind of how to get involved, which organizations are working on these different issues. There's even model legislation that you can send to your state legislators. There's even a way for you to find out who your state legislators are so that you can email them or write them a letter and say, you know what? I think the US president should be elected by a national popular vote. There's this movement across the country, 15 other states have passed the national popular vote interstate
You know,
compact.
you're saying that
I want this passed in Texas too.
that is important. I want you to please explain the national popular vote, because a lot of people don't realize that there is a constitutional way that we can prevent the ills that occurred in 2000 and 2016. Explain that,
Yeah.
please.
Yes. Well, so actually 15 times in our country's history, the person who won the national popular vote did not take the presidency because
Wait,
of
wait,
the
wait, wait,
Electoral
wait. Did you
College.
say 15?
I mean, 5 times. I'm sorry,
Oh, okay.
5 times.
Okay, 5 times, yes.
5 times.
You
Five
scared me
times.
about okay, go ahead, yeah.
No, 5 times in our nation's history. Um, the Electoral College is the way that it's set up. Each state has a certain number of electors, and in each state, that state adds up the popular vote in their state, and whoever wins the popular vote in that state gets all of the electors. So even if it's like 51% versus 49%, all of those electors go to the person who won in that state. And so that system really distorts what the people want. I read a recent study from National Popular NPR that said that someone could win the presidency with only a quarter of the national popular vote.
Yes.
Now, the interesting thing is that the U.S. Constitution, created the Electoral College, but it also creates a way out. So the U.S. Constitution says that each state shall figure out how to choose its electors. So that leaves the door open for states to decide to give their electors to the winner of the national popular vote. So that means that every election, it's added up anyway. We know what the national popular vote is, and states can sign this interstate national popular vote compact, and they can agree that their electors will go to the winner of the national popular vote. Now, there are already 15 states representing 194 out of 270 electors needed to win. So we're actually really close to, if a few more states, and especially states like Texas with a lot of electors, if they sign on to the interstate national popular vote compact, we could move to a national popular vote, and finally we can elect our president ourselves. We don't need, electors appointed by political parties to pick our president for us. We elect people in 5,000 other offices in this country by a direct vote, and we should do it with the presidency as well.
Ironically, what's interesting is in 2000, I believe the Supreme Court actually came out and pointed out that, in fact, the state houses could actually do exactly that. In 2000, because they thought they may have needed it for Florida, to go ahead and say that the legislature can go ahead and assign the electors, and that, which means that it's already passed constitutional muster.
That's right. That's right. And so this is something that we can do. I think something that people may not appreciate about the Electoral College is the way in which it really does distort our elections. So in 2020, there are about 6 battleground states. And those states tend to get all or most visits from the candidates, but they also get more federal funding. They also get more disaster relief. And they also get the candidates to listen to what they care about. That's only 6 states. So 44 other states, the spectator states, we just watch, and we don't really have a say, and the candidates really have no incentive to care about what's happening in our states. And that's a real distortion of the will of the people and of how elections should run.
That is a complete shame. Now, when you wrote this book, let me back up. How did you just release the book now, or has it been out for quite a while?
Yeah, so the book came out March 30th, which you may remember was right when the coronavirus was heating up. And, nobody really wanted to hear about or cover anything but the pandemic, including me. So what I've done is I'm sort of relaunching the book. I gave it some time, let things settle down. The election season is heating up. And I think that these issues are really relevant. They're also relevant because some of the issues that I write about are on ballots in different states. And so I would also like citizens to know about, to find out, is there a measure on the ballot about gerrymandering? Is there a measure on the ballot about the national popular vote? There are things other than the presidential election that can really affect how our country runs.
Now, a lot of folks would ask, is your book an ideological book? And in scanning the book, I found that it didn't really cover issues that, I think this is a book that's really a democracy book. In other words, the will of the people, whatever the will of the people may be. Do I get that right? Did I see that?
Yes, right? and I also made a real effort for it to be nonpartisan. I looked at issues simply through the lens of one person, one vote, every citizen having an equal voice. And one of the things that was actually quite hopeful is that I found that there's a fair amount of agreement among Democrats and Republicans about these issues. Republicans gerrymander and so do Democrats, and Republicans want to fix gerrymandering and so do Democrats. So what I like about the book and what I like about the ideas in it is that, there are things in here that a vast majority of Americans agree upon. And that's rare in this time of hyperpartisanship. But I think that if we can pay attention to those areas of agreement, make change in those areas of agreement, we can have a much more smoothly functioning democracy that can then help us really move forward on issues like climate change, police brutality, healthcare. Until our representatives really reflect the will of the people, we're not going to make progress on those issues. We really need the will of the people to make progress on those issues.
Now, interestingly, when we talk about partisanship, first of all, do we still need parties?
I struggled about whether to cover parties in the book. I did not. I decided not to include or kind of take apart the whole two-party system because I really wanted to focus on the kind of the smaller changes that could have a really big impact. I think that, changing to a national popular vote, turning over the drawing of voting district maps to citizens rather than politicians, instituting nationwide automatic voter registration. Let's get those 50 million people who are not registered to vote on the voter rolls, making sure everyone has access to easy voting. So these are things that I don't think there's a lot, there doesn't have to be a lot of debate about. We can just make these things happen and things will work more smoothly. Whereas I feel like kind of taking on the two-party system is a bit of a bigger issue. I wanted to give a pathway to change that we could follow right now.
And that makes sense. In other words, you want to bite what you know you can handle right now, and then later on that may be another battle. Because the reason I ask that, because when we talk about hyperpartisanship, right, it's interesting because the kind of dialogues that I have, I sit down with people at first without trying to get them not to assume what my ideological bent is. And interestingly, the things that I support are the things that most people support. In other words, whether irrespective of party. But a lot of the things that we don't support, irrespective of party, are several times or many times the things many of the parties both support. Okay, in other words, you will find that the both parties support certain policies that, let's say, work with corporations, while neither Republicans or Democratic people, the rank and file, do. So many times you find the people have more in common than the separation in parties would indicate, and you'd find that the folks on the top have more in common that don't apply to any of the people below them. Have you seen that? Have you noticed that?
Yeah, well, so with that example that you give, what I would say is that there's something else going on here. There's a reason why Democrats and Republicans are both interested in what corporations want and think. And that's because running an election is very expensive. and they need donations to run their campaigns. And this is a chapter in one of my book. I talk about the power of money in elections. And again, there are simple things we can do, like limit donations, individual donations, and bar corporations from making donations to campaigns at all. And there are, all kinds of things we can do anti-corruption wise, kind of ending the revolving door of representatives becoming lobbyists. So, we can fix some things within the system to actually decrease the role of money in policymaking and in campaigns. And by doing that, I think what we'll do is we'll end up giving more power to ordinary Americans and ordinary citizens, because those votes then are going to matter to the representatives.
Yeah, I mean, that's the, we've been working on getting money out of politics for a long time. In fact, Citizens United, McCutcheon, all these particular Supreme Court rulings that pretty much made our vote purchasable, if you will, or the vote of the politician purchasable. But you give a lot of classes. You have a lot of classes on YouTube. You have a lot of classes at what you call a flash course on democracy. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Flash Course on Democracy was actually inspired by a little bit by COVID. I have a son who is in film school at Chapman University and came home in the spring because of COVID. So I had a filmmaker at home. And I had a book that kind of disappeared a bit because of the pandemic. And I thought, I'm just going to find other ways to get these ideas out. I really believe in the ideas. I really believe that we can make our government and our elections work more smoothly if people just were more aware of what these kind of weird structures are and how to fix them. And so he and I collaborated together on these flash course on democracy videos. So they're little short, like 5-minute kind of fun videos. One is on the Electoral College, one is on gerrymandering, one is on vote by mail. And I take information from the book and just kind of really hit it really fast and fun. They're kind of like, I don't know if you've ever seen the Crash Course. John Green has these flash courses on history. So it's kind of after that model. So it's just another way, a fun way to spread awareness about some of these issues. I hope it's the kind of thing that can be used, when kids are, at home flipping through YouTube, or teachers can also assign them to, have a really fun way to engage young people in these elections.
Now, the thing about it, you said, well, COVID kind of, as far as your book is concerned, COVID kind of put a little thing on it. Actually, the good thing about this book is pretty much timeless, until we get the compact done, until we get all these lists of things done. I mean, right now I'm looking at the Texas, your website and where Texas is ranked, and we are a spectator state. 54% of Texans don't vote, which I think you're being very generous when you say 54% of Texans don't vote. I think that 54%, that's probably in a good year.
Yeah, it's a presidential election, so that's actually the highest possible. But still, we're all failing. Every state is failing.
Right, and it's interesting because Texas, you gave a D-. That is horrendous. This is a big state. I mean, in fact, we are actually a non-vote. The way we're moving the vote in Texas that's going forward is we're telling folks that we're a non-voting state, and think about what could happen if we ever started voting.
Right. Well, things like, think about what if Texas had automatic voter registration? That's the number one reason non-voters don't vote, is they're not registered. So what if Texas registered everybody? What if instead of having, I think you have vote by mail, but only with a very specific excuse, and COVID isn't even a legitimate excuse.
It's not a legitimate excuse, even though they're saying if you can prove that somehow you shouldn't go because you have they may give you a break.
But very, very narrow. So if you had automatic vote by mail, automatic voter registration, if you were signed onto the National Popular Vote Compact, if your voting districts were drawn fairly so that people felt like their votes were going to matter, it didn't matter where they lived, and that their votes were going to be kind of twisted around by the politicians who were drawing the voting district maps. Like, think about the voice that Texas could have in the country. It's a big state, there's a lot of people in it. And I'm curious, what does Texas have to say? We don't actually know what Texas has to say.
That is
Because
so
half people
true.
aren't even voting. I don't know what Texas thinks.
And sadly, the people that need to vote are the ones that are not voting here in Texas, and that is why we have things like the worst health insurance in rate, and why health-wise anyhow. That's another story. Now, two more questions, or rather, one more question, and then I'm going to ask you to tell me what I didn't ask you. How do you feel about 2020?
How do I feel about 2020? So if you're talking about the election, there are a couple
The
things.
whole picture, the
Oh,
election, the whole picture, yeah.
Oh, 2020. It's a tumultuous, interesting, horrifying time. I think that sometimes we need to be shaken up in order for change to happen. I think that we have to be pulled out of our comfort zone in a way that makes us look at what's going on. Why are we having wildfires? Why are we having raging hurricanes? Why are we having protests in the street? I think it is a time when we can look at those specific issues, or we can step back and say, okay, what is happening in our system? What's happening in the bigger picture that might be underlying all of this? And that's one of the things that I was trying to do with my book, We Call This Democracy, is look behind climate change and police brutality and healthcare and all those issues that we're struggling with now, and say, maybe there are some other things happening that if we fix them, we could make progress on climate change. We could make progress on healthcare. We can make progress on police brutality. So, as difficult as 2020 is, it could be a wake-up call. It could be what we need to really look at things differently in a structural way.
I think you're so right, and I think it's humbling, because whereas we've been the country that look at the other countries around the world as basket cases, it's amazing if you go to the EU or if you go to Central America, we are now the basket case. And we are the ones that supposedly lead democracy around the world. And we are showing that even our Constitution has some flaws that need some sort of correcting if we are to be a real democracy. Now, Elizabeth, what didn't I ask you that you wished I had asked?
I think I would love to talk a little bit about what citizens can actually do here. So
Please
I
tell
talk
me.
about a lot of big issues, like Electoral College, gerrymandering, automatic vote by mail, all these kind of big issues. So what does that mean for citizens? So of course, the simple thing is register and vote. The other thing, though, is also talk to people around you and make sure they're registered and that they vote, especially young people. We've learned that young people often need that extra nudge to register, to make sure they're up to date and to get voting. But I'd like you to take it a little bit further. Instead of just thinking about the presidential election, I'd like you to think about what's happening at your state level. I'd like you to really care about your state legislatures, find out who they are, find out what they stand for, find out what they think about the national popular vote, what they're doing about gerrymandering, what they're doing about automatic voter registration. The state level is somewhere where we can really have an impact. State legislatures want to know what their constituents think. And that leads me to kind of my last piece of advice is, I wish that we would all become what I call cell phone citizens. So that means that every citizen in the United States has 5 representatives whose job it is to represent you. So I'm talking about your 2 senators and your 1 representative on the federal level, and then your state legislature, your 2 state legislatures, kind of a senatorial one and kind of a representative type one. So I would like you to take, the 5 or 10 minutes that it takes to find their contact information, put it in your phone, put their phone number and their email address in your phone, and tell them what you think. Learn about these issues, write to them about vote by mail, about automatic voter registration, about national popular vote, about gerrymandering, and about any issue that you care about. Our democracy only functions when there is a voice, when we are using our voice to tell our representatives what we think. And I believe that if we did that, we could make huge changes at the state level which would make our democracy function more smoothly and finally have our laws reflect the will of the people.
Elizabeth, that advice about putting those 5 people in your phone is perfect. That is what everybody needs to do. Elizabeth Rusch, author of You Call This Democracy? Folks, let's learn about our democracy. Let's go ahead and get that. Thank you so kindly for having been with us, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much for having me, and keep up the wonderful work.
I'm Egberto Willies, host of Politics Done Right, an independent news program. I post several news videos of interest every day. I ask you so kindly to subscribe to my channel, and please leave me some comments. Thank you very much.